Okay, so good afternoon, and thank you everyone for making the time to be here today. My name is Antonella Giancarlo. I'm a Senior Communications Officer with the City of Hamilton, and I will be moderating the media availability today. Before we begin, I'd like to ask those who are not speaking to please stay on mute until you're called upon, just so we can minimize any background noises. Media are asked to keep their questions to Chedoke Creek, and we have some spokespersons here today from the city to provide some initial comments and then ask any questions, or sorry, my apologies, answer any questions you may have. I'd like to welcome the General Manager of Public Works, Carlyle Khan, and Nick Winters, the Director of Hamilton Water. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Carlyle, who's going to provide some opening remarks. Carlyle, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Earlier today, the City of Hamilton pleaded guilty in court to the Chedoke Creek spill charges, which was laid by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks in 2020. As the General Manager of Public Works and on behalf of the City of Hamilton, I want to make it clear that the city accepts full responsibility for the spill that took place in Chedoke Creek. If I can ask whoever just joined us to mute, that would be helpful. We apologize to the community, our partners, and members of council for the way the situation was handled and for the resulting environmental impact. As a result of pleading guilty, the city will be subject to a fine of $2.1 million. Furthermore, the city will be obligated to pay a victim surcharge fee of $525,000, in addition to restitution to the Royal Botanical Gardens, totaling $346,500. The city has taken numerous actions to improve the quality of the Chedoke Creek, which includes ongoing targeted dredging work. We will continue to take action in consultation with our community partners and agencies to improve the conditions of Cootes Paradise. I'd like to maybe just shift a little bit and talk a little bit about the background. As you know, the spill into the Chedoke Creek was identified and stopped in July 2018. Upon detection, the city removed approximately 242,000 liters of floating material from the creek. In December 2020, the city was issued an order by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, Parks, requiring the city to conduct targeted dredging of the Chedoke Creek, as well as a requirement to investigate and implement environmental measures in Cootes Paradise. Since the summer of 2018, we've been working closely with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to investigate the incident and respond to various aspects of the order and ensuing amendments of the order issued by the Ministry of Environment related to the spill. These include conducting targeted dredging of the Chedoke Creek and investigation of implementing offsetting measures to Cootes Paradise. I can assure you the city has remained committed to this work and has spent considerable public resources complying to the order. Following a pause of the dredging work in Chedoke Creek in 2022, I'm pleased that the targeting dredging to clean up the creek started again earlier this week. The work is anticipated to take approximately 3.5 months to complete. I would now like to turn it over to Nick Winters, Director of Hamilton Water, to speak in more detail about the work we've done and what we will be doing in the future.
Thank you. And I'd like to begin by echoing General Manager Khan's earlier remarks. I want to apologize and assure members of the public and our partners that we're doing everything possible to remediate the Chedoke Creek and impacts to Cootes Paradise so that we can improve the water quality in the area and the overall health of our water system. As the head of the city's water, wastewater, and stormwater utility, I have a lot of proud days because I get to talk about all the fantastic work that Hamilton Water does within our community. Issues like the Chedoke Creek spill are exactly what we're responsible for preventing from happening. And I'm not proud to stand here today and talk about us failing this community in that responsibility. Hamilton Water also takes great pride in delivering value to the community for the investments that are made by our ratepayers. And it doesn't sit well with me to think of spending even $1 on fines related to a failure of our responsibility as stewards of the water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. And clearly today we're talking about much more than $1. On the topic of trust, I want to recognize the trust that was broken between Hamilton Water, our city council as owners of the systems that we operate and maintain, our Hamilton Harbor Remedial Action Plan partners, our community members, and our Indigenous partners, all of which we've been working hard to rebuild. Speaking specifically to the Indigenous community, we understand your beliefs about water being sacred. We also know that there are many that feel disrespected as a result of this incident. We know we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm confident that we're on the right track. A number of steps have already been taken to help improve the quality of the Chedoke Creek, including the ongoing targeted dredging work and a number of initiatives under the city's Coots Paradise work plan. In terms of protecting and improving the quality of Hamilton's watersheds, we're also making real positive progress through initiatives like the recent launch of the city's Watershed Action Plan, the city's Surface Water Quality Program, and the ongoing work to locate and repair infrastructure issues in the sewer system that could lead to sewage being released into the environment. Some actions that the city's already taken include establishing a protocol and webpage for informing the public about bypasses at the wastewater treatment plant and its 14 monitored combined sewer overflow outfall locations, hiring staff and implementing new programs to do deeper physical inspections and preventative maintenance of our city water and sewer infrastructure, implementation of a real-time control program to capture optimal amounts of wastewater within the system and avoid unnecessary combined sewage discharges during wet weather events, investing $340 million in upgrades to the city's Woodward wastewater treatment plant with support from the provincial and federal governments, the development and implementation of the sewer lateral cross-connection program, which began in 2002 with the goal of identifying and correcting plumbing deficiencies that exist when a property's sanitary sewer line is improperly connected to a storm sewer. And to date, the city's identified and corrected more than 475 of those improper connections, diverting more than 106 million liters of wastewater away from the natural environment every single year. Our staff remain committed to working as hard as we can to ensure that this community has water, wastewater, and stormwater systems that we can all be proud of. And with that goal in mind, we'll continue working together and in consultation with our community partners, Indigenous partners, and agencies to not only finish the cleanup work that's been started, but to earn back the trust that we've lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick and Carlyle. With that, we will now go to members of the media to begin asking their questions. We have a number of media partners here with us today. I'm just popping into the chat popping them into the chat. We're going to go in that order. We'll start with one question and one follow-up. If time permits, we'll do a second round of questions. So with that, our first media partner is Ken Mann from 900 CHML. Ken, please go ahead and ask your question. I'm just going to jump in for Ken. He's popped into the chat. He's having microphone issues and he's asked for an overview of the dredging so far.
Certainly, I'm happy to take that question. Thanks very much, Ken. So the dredging hasn't actually started yet. In-water work did start this past Monday, July the 17th. And this week, our contractor, who's Milestone Environmental, has been working through the main area of the creek, and they're actually raking larger materials out of the creek bed that may interfere with the dredger once it's actually put into operation. So think of things like tree limbs, rocks, other things that shouldn't be in our water courses that are from time to time, like shopping carts and things like that. And that work's been progressing very well. They've actually just about completed that raking activity in the main area of the creek at the end of today. We are looking to begin dredging early next week. The first thing that has to happen is we need to actually lift the dredging machine over the waterfront trail bridge and out into the Coots Paradise abatement, and that's going to happen early next week. We're still working on setting up the final schedule. It's lifted with cranes, so there is going to be a closure of the waterfront trail for a period of time to allow that work to progress. And then when the dredging actually begins, we're going to start in the abatement at Princess Point. There's 1 to 2 weeks worth of work to do there, and then the dredging machine will be lifted again back into the main creek area, and we'll proceed to dredge that over of a period approaching 3 months by that point in time.
Thanks so much, Nick. Ken, if you had a follow-up to that, do you mind popping it into the chat? Oh, thank you. Okay, great. I also wanted to take this opportunity to let everyone know that this media availability is being recorded. Next on our list, we have John Best from the Bay Observer. John, please go ahead. John, it looks like you're on mute. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to move along to Bobby Herstova at CBC Hamilton, and we'll come back to you, John.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone's having a good day. My first question, I guess it's nearly $3 million in total. Where is that money coming from, and what could that money have been used for if you didn't have to pay this?
Thank you for the question, Bobby. I'll start, and if Director Winters would like to add to it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I believe the money will come from the water wastewater rate fee that we charge. What the money could be used for, it is used for infrastructure needs. It's used to address life cycle requirements, and as we grow and expand our system, it would be used there. It is something that we recognize and we take quite seriously, and we understand the broader implication of it, and we continue to move forward.
And if I was to add on to that, the actual payments both to the court and the Royal Botanical Gardens for the restitution will come from water, wastewater, stormwater reserves. That payment is required to be made within the next 4 months, and so that's where the money will come from. And it's easy to speculate, what we could have spent that money on in a proactive and valuable fashion as opposed to fines. Think of anything in our water wastewater system, and we could have applied those funds to it.
Thank you. And I guess my other question is there any potential that you'll have to end up in court again? Is there, or is this it? Is this matter done now? Like, for example, you have that deadline to complete the dredging. If that's not done on time, will you have to end up back in court?
Thank you for the follow-up question. It is the city's full intention to meet the obligation and pay the fine in a timely manner. So, we have no intentions of ending up back in court for this or any reason.
I appreciate that. I don't want to make a third question, but I'm not asking about your intention. Is this it for the court process? And if you don't meet the cleanup time, will you end up in court again?
So thank you for that. With regards to the fine, this should be the end of it. So we're okay there. With regards to the dredging work and the cleanup efforts, we will continue to work with the ministry and all our partners. We'll keep them informed as the work progresses. And at the first sign of any delays, we will inform the ministry and we will work with them in terms of mediating any extended timelines or risks that we incur.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pop back to Don Mitchell. Don, are you, oh, sorry, my apologies, John Best. John, I'm going to see if I can unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm fine. I'm just listening to the questions. I don't have anything specific. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, John. Don Mitchell from Global News, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Money about finances as well, like in terms of the actual fine. But I'm wondering if you could actually define for me, it says victim fine surcharge for 2.9 million or 2.985 million. Can you kind of explain that? What is that?
So I could jump in on that one if you don't mind, Carlyle.
Yep.
A standard part of any fines that are processed through provincial offences court is to include a surcharge that is held by the province and applied to positive actions related to improving things for victims of offences. And provincial offences court deals with all kinds of matters, both criminal and bylaw related. So Don, with respect to, what might the surcharge from this fine be applied to by the province, I can't speculate to that. It does go into a general pot of finances that they use for those positive purposes. Hope that helps.
Yeah, so something to reach out to the province for, I guess. Yeah, okay.
It is, yes.
That's kind of the only question I had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. I'm going to hand it over to Sebastian Braun at the Hamilton Spectator. Sebastian, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking my questions here. The Crown Counsel, Michael Mallison, said today that this was a resolution that was massively in the public interest. He said that if this matter went to trial, it's possible there could have been an outcome that was more favorable to the Ministry of the Environment, as in a higher fine or a higher penalty. But it's also possible that there could have been an outcome that would have been more favorable to the city. So I'm curious about why the city decided to come to a resolution and not go to trial.
Thanks for the question. I will try and provide an answer there. I think as we worked through the case and the lawyers on both sides held discussions and negotiations, our legal counsel went back to the city council and laid out the case and kind of where we're at. At the end of the day, I think both legals agreed that this would be in the best interest of the public, and that's kind of where we landed. Speculating on if we would have been better off or worse, I think we'll probably never know the answer to that question, but definitely we're in a better position today, and we continue to address the cleanup efforts and making sure that we address, I guess, the water quality of Coutts Paradise as we move forward.
Appreciate that. The second question is with respect to the $2.1 million fine. I know it's to be paid to the court, but could you give us any insight on, where that money is going or who it's going to specifically? Is it going to be paid out to the ministry? Do you have any idea what they're doing with that money? Is it going to be, in some way involved with the dredging work, or any insight at all as to where the money's going and what's going to be done with it?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, we don't have line of sight on that. That would be a question for the courts and the ministry.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'm going to ask Dave Woodard from Global News CHML. If you have a question, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Just one question from me, which is we were told that all that prep work that you were talking about, Nick, in earlier on, that was going to be done last week and not this week. Are we already delayed on this dredging project? And if so, how far behind are we?
So thank you for the question, Dave, and I apologize if there was a misunderstanding. No, this work, the project is on schedule. Actually, it could be a little bit ahead of schedule. The prep work that was being done last week and previous was work within the dredge material management area. So setting up the dewatering cells and setting up the piping both on land and in water that's going to carry the material that's being dredged from the bottom of Princess Point Abatement and Chedoke Creek and then into those dewatering areas. And then the other task was actually getting the dredging barge on site, all the necessary equipment checks and things like that related to it, and getting it into the water. That's what occurred last week and the week previous. It was always the intention to begin in waterworks this week, starting on July the 17th. And as I mentioned, it did start with a bit of a variation of the process with that raking as opposed to moving directly into hooking up the dredging head and beginning to move material.
Excellent. That's the only question. Just one other follow-up. Was there any sense that there would be any kind of protests or exercising treaty rights at all throughout the process so far?
Yeah, so thanks again for the question, Dave. No, there's been no sense of that whatsoever. We do have representatives from the different Indigenous nations that are trained now fully and participating in the project starting next week as environmental monitors. And it's been nothing but a benefit working with the teams from those nations and getting them involved in the project. We expect that to continue.
Thanks so much for those questions. I apologize, I skipped one on my list. Matthew Van Dongen at The Spectator, please go ahead.
Hi, folks. Thanks for taking the time. Now that the court process is done, is there anything else the city can tell us, or will we ever learn any more about why that gate was open for so long? Are there any additional details that can now be shared about that? Is there something that the provincial investigators learned or anyone else learned along the way that explains why that spill was continuous for so long?
So I'll start the response, Matthew Van Dongen, and thank you for the question. I don't think during the course of the investigation we've learned anything more, but I will defer to Nick to see, confirm that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I could say I wish we did know more. I think that the agreed statement of facts are related to the guilty plea that were read in court today. We'll speak to the details of the charges and the case that the Crown put together. So I think, Matthew, not to be evasive, but I think the answers to your questions are in those documents, which I understand are public documents.
So, public via what avenue? Do you have copies that you can make available, or are you telling us we should go to the Provincial Offences Courthouse?
Yeah, so we certainly have copies available to us. I don't believe that there would be an issue with releasing those, but I mean, they are public documents, but let us just check in the background and make sure that there's nothing that I'm not aware of, and assuming that everything is good to go, we can absolutely share those after this call.
That would be handy. And then as a follow-up, and forgive me, I may have missed your answer to this to others, but my understanding of when there's an environmental prosecution and a guilty plea and a fine, oftentimes the victim impact surcharge amounts will go back to the municipality where the environmental problem occurred. But does that happen in the case where the conviction is against the municipality?
Yeah,
are we effectively giving money to ourselves to use for great projects?
So I'll apologize to everyone because I gave my general understanding of the way that process worked, Matthew. Honestly, you may know more about it than me. So how that money could be used to benefit victims, whether or not that could be applied in the municipality of the city of Hamilton or something different. That's something we'd have to check on.
Thank you. We have Crystal Deboo. I hope I pronounced that properly, from In the Hammer. Crystal, please go ahead with your questions.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my question. I'd like to know if there's any specific individual being held responsible for the Chedoke Creek spill, or is this like the city as a whole taking responsibility for it?
Thank you for the question. I think the answer there is the city as a whole. We are taking responsibility for the matter, and therefore we enter the guilty plea today. There's no one individual.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, what's next after the dredging of Chedoke Creek? What are your other plans?
So I'm happy to take that one. Thanks very much, Crystal. The dredging is just one component of our commitment to improving the health of Chedoke Creek and the watersheds. There's the Coots Paradise work plan, which is remaining, and that there's work going on there presently. We have a floating wetland in Coots Paradise right now that we're monitoring to determine the feasibility of whether natural technology like that can be a benefit to reducing nutrient loadings within Chedoke Creek, within Coots Paradise. We're doing some testing this summer within areas of Coots Paradise that have been specifically selected between the city's consultants and the Royal Botanical Gardens. And we've got areas that are essentially cordoned off with underwater curtains, and we're looking at whether there are treatment processes that we can use in these areas that have sediment in them that will retain the phosphorus and potentially nitrogen in those areas and prevent them from becoming biologically available in the future. Coots Paradise it's so large that taking a look at dredging to remove sediment in that area, it's just not a realistic option. So we're looking at alternatives to nutrient removal in order to assist with some of the impacts of the spill that we're not able to deal with via the dredging in Chedoke Creek. And then we've got 3 environmental assessments that are progressing as well, and they're looking at what interventions can potentially be made in the city's wastewater and stormwater collection systems to prevent new nutrients from being flushed into that watershed and the Coots Paradise Marsh there, as well as evaluating some of these technologies like the floating wetlands and other things to determine if there's options that should be implemented within the natural environment as well. Layer on top of that the city's watershed action plan and the work of the stakeholder liaison committee that's being done there to look at and evaluate other programming alternatives and capital upgrades, and there's a laundry list of items that that the teams are working on. So I guess that's a long way of saying the work doesn't stop here, not by a long shot. The court case closes one door. When we complete the dredging, that will be another. But the city's committed to ongoing work to make sure that we're doing everything we can for the health of all of our watersheds, but starting with Coots Paradise.
Thank you so much. I just want to recognize that we also have CHCH and KX 94.7 on the line, and both have indicated they will not be asking questions. Nick and Carlyle, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go through the list one more time and see if any of our media partners have follow-ups or new questions they want to ask. Ken at 900 CHML, is there another question you'd like to pose? I will take that as a no. John Best, if there is a question you thought of over the course of this, if you'd. Okay, thank you. I see none from Dave Woodard as well. Bobby, did you have a follow-up question you wanted to ask?
I don't.
Okay, great. Sebastian.
Yeah, I've just got one more. It's with regards to something that was mentioned in the agreed statement of facts this afternoon, where Crown Counsel mentioned of he was talking about the well overflow gate being left open at 5%. He said in February 2014, there was an official city document that was generated explaining how the station is supposed to operate. This document incorrectly stated the well overflow gate is supposed to be set at 5%. He said that it's unknown how this error occurred, but that it's clear that it was supposed to be closed. Do you have any insight as to why the report made such a gross error in stating that it should have been left open at 5%?
Thanks very much for the question, Sebastian. One of the challenges with investigating this incident was going back in time, looking into projects and the availability of individuals who were involved in those projects. And, at a high level, what I can tell you is that there was a document, a process control narrative that speaks to the operation of our system that was generated in that time frame in 2014. And it had improper information in it. And, when you look at a document that is meant to guide the operation of our system, when staff are looking at what's physically happening in the field and given the supporting information that they have versus what's supposed to be happening, if they see that the two align, then they're not going to see something that shouldn't be happening if they're looking at the wrong information. And that's what that means. Again, at that high level, we weren't able to determine why the error was made in that document.
Thank you so much. Matthew at the spec, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, if you don't mind, thanks. I don't know what other staffers are on this call, so maybe Nick, this might be a tough one for you, but can you explain why it took us so long to get to this point? I mean, the charges were laid must have been, I don't know, 2 years ago, quite a long time ago. And the city has never publicly suggested they weren't responsible for the spill. So it was sort of a default guilty plea. So what took so long to get here? Are there other negotiations about expectations for the city that were involved?
Yeah, I'll defer to Carlyle if he wants to answer that, and if not, then I'm happy to take it. You're on mute, Carlyle.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the question, Matthew. I think it was just following the process. The ministry laid the fine, then both legal parties got together and we basically went through the process. The fine was laid in 2020, and as you know, we had 3 years where we had unprecedented global experience called the pandemic. And once people got back and we were able to focus on other things and the pandemic was released, I think it just followed the natural progression from both sides of legal working on the fine.
Okay, so there's not another side to this. We aren't in parallel working on a joint investment by the city or the province in projects that would help this sort of issue, are we? There haven't been related but separate negotiations over funding for other projects that would have become part of these negotiations?
Yeah, so I can answer that. No, there's nothing going on. I mean, don't get me wrong. We have ongoing discussions with both levels of the government about grant funding opportunities for projects here in Hamilton, and we advocate very strongly for those funds to come and be spent in this community. But there's nothing going on related to the Chedoke Creek charges or this court settlement in that regard.
Thanks for that clarity.
Thank you. Crystal, did you have another question you wanted to ask before we wrap things up?
I'm not sure if this has been answered already. I'm wondering if there's a timeline for when you expect to finish everything with the cleanup at Chedoke Creek.
So I'm happy to take that. Thank you, Crystal. Our timeline is to have all of the work within the water, so within Chedoke Creek, completed by October 31st of this year. There will be some work within Chedoke Park that continues beyond that. You know, the amount of time that it takes for the water in the material that is dredged from Chedoke Creek, and it sits in these big socks called geotubes. We do have no control over the amount of time that it takes for that excess water to drain out of those socks and for the material in those geotubes to become dry enough that we can test it and then transport it to landfill for disposal. So that will take some time, which we're not aware of, but we do expect that will finish sometime around the end of this year. And then, Chedoke Park, where we've set up these dredging material management areas, is an active recreational area. Our facility right now is built on top of baseball diamonds. So we'll be returning to the site in the spring of 2024 to remediate that area and reinstate those recreational facilities so that, next year's baseball season can go on uninterrupted by us. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks so much. So that concludes today's media availability. I have noted as soon as we get copies of the agreed statement of facts, I can pass those along to Bobby and Dawn as requested in the chat. If any other media partners are interested in receiving it, please don't hesitate to reach out. Or alternately, if you have other questions, also please feel free to reach out and I'll endeavor to get you responses and additional information as quickly as possible. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you.